Welcome to my channel. Let's dive into a new story and find out what came after love.
I was sitting in our pristine, sunlit kitchen when my wife of 7 years walked through the front door, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a heavy white envelope from the local medical clinic. She didn't look at me. She dropped her designer keys onto the marble countertop, sat down across from me, and burst into a cold, hysterical sob. She told me she had gone to the doctor for a routine checkup, but the results had come back with something terrifying: a highly contagious, painful sexually transmitted disease. She looked me dead in the eye, tears streaming down her airbrushed cheeks, and begged for my forgiveness, claiming she must have contracted it from a contaminated public restroom or a routine spa treatment during her last business trip. She thought she was looking at a panicked, heartbroken husband who would blindly comfort her and share her medical misery. She had no idea that I had already received a confidential phone call from my own physician 3 days prior. I knew exactly what she had, because I had spent the last 2 weeks orchestrating the exact medical trap that brought her to her knees. I wasn't her victim. I was the architect of her exposure, and the man who gave her that disease was about to find out that sleeping with another man's wife carries a price that no amount of money could ever pay. To understand how a marriage arrives at a point of biological warfare, you have to look closely at the pristine facade we had built in the affluent suburbs of Seattle. My name is Arthur, and for a decade I worked as a senior clinical research specialist for a major biomedical firm, specializing in molecular diagnostics, cellular pathology, and epidemiology. I was a man who lived under the strict, unyielding laws of science, data, quantifiable evidence, and cause and effect. My entire existence was dedicated to identifying microscopic anomalies, isolating dangerous variables, and neutralizing threats before they could contaminate a clean system. My wife, Eleanor, was a high-end corporate recruiter for elite tech executives and venture capitalists. She was stunning, highly articulate, meticulously dressed, and possessed a social magnetism that contrasted beautifully with my quiet, introspective, analytical nature. We lived in a custom-built contemporary home, shared a substantial, rapidly growing investment portfolio, and were universally regarded by our entire social circle as the golden couple who had everything completely figured out. I gave Eleanor my complete, uncritical devotion, my absolute financial trust, and the total freedom to build her lucrative career. But in the world of science, a single hidden anomaly can ruin the most perfect experiment, and Eleanor's anomaly began when she signed a recruitment contract for a prestigious venture capital firm headed by a man named Julian Vance. Julian Vance was a multimillionaire investor whose reputation for corporate ruthlessness in the boardroom was only matched by his predatory, narcissistic behavior in his personal life. He was 45, fiercely charming, physically imposing, and possessed the kind of generational wealth that made him believe the ordinary rules of human decency simply did not apply to him. When Eleanor first landed his account, she spoke of him with high professional respect, describing him as a demanding but visionary leader who could elevate her firm to a national level. But within 3 months, the professional boundaries began to noticeably dissolve. The afternoon business lunches turned into late-night corporate dinners. The late-night dinners quickly morphed into emergency weekend strategy sessions in Vancouver, San Francisco, and Miami. Whenever I gently questioned the frequency of these trips or the odd hours of their phone calls, Eleanor would touch my arm, smile her practiced, reassuring corporate smile, and remind me that Julian's account was generating the massive commissions that would fund our early retirement estate in Tuscany. She treated me like a naive, sheltered academic who didn't understand the aggressive, relentless nature of high-stakes corporate business. Because I loved her blindly and valued her happiness above my own comfort, I constantly forced my doubts into the background, choosing to trust the woman who had sworn her life to me on a beach in Maui 7 years ago. The illusion shattered into irrecoverable pieces on a rainy Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing routine seasonal diagnostic logs on my secure laboratory terminal. Eleanor had left her personal laptop open on the study desk at home before rushing out to a lunch meeting, and its local automated backup utility was connected to our synchronized home server network. A high-priority calendar synchronization caught my eye: a private flight manifest and an executive suite reservation at an ultra-luxury resort in Aspen, Colorado, scheduled for the upcoming weekend. The reservation was officially under Julian Vance's corporate name, but the secondary guest passenger profile contained Eleanor's passport details, her private cell phone number, and a request for a custom bouquet of white orchids to be placed in the room upon arrival. My blood ran completely cold as I sat in the sterile environment of my lab, surrounded by glowing monitors. I bypassed the standard user restrictions, accessed the archived messaging database on our shared network drive, and began to extract her deleted data. What I found within those encrypted files didn't just break my heart. it systematically, coldly incinerated every memory, every sacrifice, and every expression of love I had shared with Eleanor for nearly a decade. The text messages, multimedia files, and audio notes stretched back for over 6 months, painting a graphic, undeniable picture of systematic, joyful betrayal. They weren't just sleeping together in luxury hotels across the country, they were actively mocking me, using my devotion as a punchline. Julian had referred to me in several messages as the lab coat, a dull, compliant, predictable drone who was too buried in his microscopes and spreadsheets to notice his beautiful wife was slipping away into a completely different world of wealth and passion. Elena's responses were a lethal injection to my pride. She told Julian that my stable, unsuspecting nature made me the perfect cover story, a safe, reliable anchor she could always return to after her wild, extravagant weekends with a real man of power. In one voice note, her laughter was sharp, careless, and completely unrecognizable, as she described how I had carefully packed her favorite travel pillow and vitamins for a business trip that she was actually spending in Julian's penthouse suite. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of their conversations transformed the agonizing grief in my chest into a cold, dense, and permanent desire for absolute retribution. A standard man would have packed her bags, called a standard divorce attorney, and engaged in a messy, emotionally draining legal battle that would divide our hardened assets in half. But my scientific training taught me that the most effective way to eliminate a pathogen is not to attack it prematurely, but to let it replicate until it completely destroys its own host environment. I spent the next 3 days analyzing the data with the precision of a molecular scientist designing a specialized vaccine. I knew from the downloaded chat logs that Julian Vance was a serial adulterer who frequented exclusive underground high society clubs while traveling internationally for his investment funds. Through my professional network in the clinical, diagnostic, and public health sectors, I discovered a crucial piece of biological leverage. Julian had recently visited a highly exclusive, private executive health clinic in Beverly Hills for a specialized medical panel. Using an anonymous proxy network and a known security vulnerability in the clinic's outdated third-party patient portal, I accessed his laboratory profile. The biological data was a revelation. Julian Vance was an asymptomatic carrier of a rare, highly aggressive, and highly contagious strain of a sexually transmitted bacterial infection, one that resisted standard first-line antibiotics and caused severe, unmistakable, and agonizing symptomatic outbreaks in women within a matter of days. He didn't know he had it because his specific male physiology suppressed the inflammatory response, but anyone he slept with without protection would inevitably face an immediate medical catastrophe. My plan required absolute, terrifying composure, a complete lockdown of my facial expressions and emotions. When Eleanor returned from her Aspen recruitment conference on Monday evening, looking glowing, refreshed, and carrying an expensive new designer handbag, I didn't question her. I didn't show a single hint of suspicion or coldness. I greeted her at the door with a glass of her favorite vintage wine, listened intently to her fabricated stories about corporate meetings and hotel dinners, and acted exactly like the compliant, trusting husband she believed me to be. That night, before she even arrived home, I initiated the first phase of my counter-infection strategy. I knew that my own medical immunity was paramount to the success of my execution, so I had already secured a private, off-the-record course of advanced, specific secondary antibiotics from a trusted research colleague in another state. I took the preventative medications secretly, ensuring that my own biological profile remained completely clean, fortified, and entirely protected from any potential transmission. Over the next 2 weeks, I remained intimate with my wife, playing the role of the passionate, devoted partner while tracking the invisible biological countdown that was currently ticking inside our household. The incubation period for that specific bacterial strain is exactly 12 to 14 days in female subjects. I watched Eleanor with clinical precision every single morning, noticing the subtle, microscopic changes in her behavior and physical demeanor before she even fully realized what was happening to her own body. First came the sudden, uncharacteristic fatigue, the way she would wince slightly when moving around the bedroom. Then came the secret, panicked phone calls she would make from the locked guest bathroom, trying to schedule immediate, emergency appointments with her private gynecologist. I watched her check her phone constantly, her face flushing with anxiety as she searched for medical symptoms on her web browser, clearing her history immediately after. She started making elaborate excuses to avoid me in the evening, claiming she was suffering from severe corporate stress, migraines, and sudden pelvic cramps due to her high-pressure accounts at the venture capital firm. I watched her confident, arrogant smile completely fade, replaced by a permanent, deep-seated, vibrating terror as the aggressive infection began to manifest its undeniable physical symptoms. She was trapped in the prison of her own lie. She couldn't tell her doctor the truth about her travel history without risking her marriage, and she couldn't tell me about her symptoms without admitting to her infidelity. This brought us back to that Tuesday afternoon in our kitchen when she finally broke down, unable to hide the physical and mental toll any longer, and dropped the heavy medical report onto the marble counter. She was sobbing hysterically, her shoulders shaking violently as she reached out to grab my hands with fingers that were ice-cold. "Arthur, please, you have to listen to me," she gasped, her eyes wide with a desperate, animalistic terror. "The doctor found an infection during my checkup. It's a specific, dangerous, highly resistant disease. I swear to you, I have absolutely no idea how this happened to me. I must have caught it from a contaminated luxury towel at the resort spa during the conference, or maybe from a public restroom at the airport terminal. You work in medicine, Arthur. You know how easily bacteria can spread on surfaces. We have to get you tested immediately. I'm so incredibly sorry to put you through this nightmare, but I'm a victim here." I sat perfectly still in my chair, my hands resting loosely on the cool marble, completely refusing to mirror her manufactured panic or offer a single shred of comfort. I looked down at the white paper report she had placed between us. The diagnosis was written in clear, cold, clinical print, the exact resistant bacterial strain I had downloaded from Julian Vance's private medical portal weeks prior. I looked back up at her, my face completely flat, devoid of the sorrow, anger, or confusion she had spent the car ride home preparing to manipulate. "The luxury spa at the Aspen resort doesn't use contaminated towels, Eleanor," I said, my voice smooth, quiet, balanced, and perfectly conversational, as if I were delivering a lecture to a room of first-year medical students. "And that specific bacterial strain cannot survive on an inanimate surface like a plastic toilet seat, a porcelain sink, or a dry cotton towel for more than 30 seconds. It requires direct, high-friction mucosal contact. It requires a living human vector. Specifically, it requires a vector named Julian Vance." The kitchen became instantly, suffocatingly silent, the heavy air pressing down on us like a physical weight. The only sound in the entire house was the low, rhythmic, mechanical humming of our luxury refrigerator. Elena's breath hitched violently in her throat, her entire body freezing into a rigid statue of pure, unadulterated shock. The tears stopped flowing down her cheeks as her eyes widened to their absolute limits, realizing in one terrifying second that the quiet, predictable scientist she had mocked for months was speaking with absolute, mathematical certainty. What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice trembling so hard she could barely articulate the words, her eyes darting toward the exit as she tried to pull her hands back. "Who is Julian? Arthur, you're being completely insane. You're making up crazy conspiracy theories because you're scared and hurt. I don't even know what you're saying." "I have the complete, unedited data set, Eleanor," I said, leaning forward slowly, resting my elbows on the marble counter, bringing my face close to hers. "I have your private flight manifests from the shared iPad cloud backup. I have the high-definition security logs from the penthouse elevator downtown. I have the hotel lobby footage of you draping yourself over him while I was working a double shift to pay for your retirement fund. And most importantly, I have Julian Vance's private clinical profile from the Beverly Hills Diagnostic Center, dated exactly 4 weeks ago. He is an asymptomatic carrier of the exact genetic mutation currently causing your physical collapse. He gave it to you in Aspen, Eleanor, and you brought it back into my house like a loyal dog bringing home a dirty stick." Eleanor collapsed backward into her chair, her spine slumping as her entire world, her status, her reputation, and her carefully constructed simulations systematically dissolved into nothingness around her. She looked at the medical report, then at my eyes, realizing that her entire double life had been completely compromised, monitored, and recorded for weeks. "Arthur, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a thin, desperate, pathetic whine as she realized denial was completely useless. "It was a mistake. I was weak. He manipulated me, Arthur. He threatened to pull his recruitment accounts from my firm and ruin my career if I didn't comply with his demands. I never loved him, not for a single second. He means nothing to me. I love you, I love our home, I love the life we built. We can fix this. The doctor said there are advanced medications, we can go to couples therapy, we can move past this." "Not for this specific strain, Eleanor," I replied, a cold, serene smile finally touching the corners of my lips. "The laboratory report you are holding indicates that this specific mutation is highly resistant to standard ciprofloxacin, azithromycin, and doxycycline. The only thing that can clear this infection from your system is a highly specialized, restricted intravenous protocol that requires a 7-day isolation stay at a specialized clinic and mandatory reporting to the state public health department. And that brings us to the second phase of my research project." I stood up slowly, walked over to my leather briefcase resting by the kitchen door, and pulled out a thick, heavy legal folder, along with a second, smaller document sealed in plastic. I walked back to the table and dropped them directly on top of her medical report. The Public Health Department has already been fully notified, I stated calmly, adjusting my watch. As a senior research specialist in molecular epidemiology, I am a legally mandated reporter for out-of-the-ordinary antibiotic-resistant outbreaks in this county. I submitted your complete diagnostic tracking file this morning, listing Julian Vance as the primary source vector for the infection. By tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m., his corporate compliance board, his primary legal team, and his current fiancée, the woman whose multi-billion-dollar family foundation entirely funds his venture capital firm, will receive an official, certified epidemiological notification from the state health authority regarding a high-risk contagious outbreak tied directly to his personal conduct and travel history. Eleanor gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her face turning a sickly shade of grey. You destroyed his firm. His fiancée's family will pull their capital funding immediately if they find out about an STD from an affair. He'll be completely ruined. He'll lose everything. Julian Vance wanted to play with biological and human variables, so I simply allowed those variables to reach their natural mathematical conclusion, I said, my voice completely flat. But his corporate ruin is only half of the equation. Look at the document underneath the folder, Eleanor. She looked down with trembling, sweating fingers, pulling the secondary document toward her. It was an official binding petition for an immediate, fault-based divorce on the grounds of egregious infidelity, emotional cruelty, and intentional biological endangerment. Attached to the petition was a comprehensive, ironclad asset freezing order issued by a family court judge who happened to be a close personal colleague of my father. Our shared accounts have already been legally segregated as of 3 hours ago, I explained, my voice steady, unyielding, and completely devoid of any human warmth. The house, which was purchased using the substantial liquidation of the inheritance from my grandfather, is completely protected under our original prenuptial agreement's standard infidelity and lifestyle clause, a clause you signed 7 years ago without reading closely because you thought I was too boring, too passive, and too weak to ever enforce it. Your personal credit cards have been completely deactivated due to unauthorized corporate expenditures. Specifically, the luxury hotel dinners and spa treatments you charged to our joint line during your weekend trysts with Julian. Arthur, you can't do this to me, she suddenly screamed, her voice turning sharp, screeching, and utterly hysterical as she stood up violently, her chair scraping loudly and aggressively against the hardwood floor. I have absolutely nowhere to go. My entire career is tied to Julian's venture capital firm. If he goes down, my professional reputation in this city is completely destroyed. No one will ever hire me again. I have an active, painful infection, Arthur. You're abandoning your wife in the middle of a medical and financial crisis. That's illegal. That's cruel. I am not abandoning you, Eleanor, I said, my voice dropping to a low, precise whisper that cut through her chaotic screams like a surgical scalpel. I am simply treating you like an isolated, contaminated sample. You chose to remove yourself from the safety of our clean, uninfected environment. You chose to introduce a foreign pathogen into our home because you thought wealth, power, and corporate luxury made you immune to the consequences of basic logic. I am a scientist, Eleanor. When a laboratory sample becomes thoroughly contaminated, we don't try to fix it, we don't cry over it, and we don't keep it in the lab. We seal the container, we document the precise cause of the failure, and we incinerate the remains so it can never infect anything else. I walked over to the front door, grabbed my tailored wool coat from the rack, and turned back to look at her one final time. She was standing in the center of our beautiful, multi-million-dollar kitchen, surrounded by the expensive marble, the custom lighting, and the absolute ruins of a life she had traded away for a few weekends of cheap adrenaline and corporate status. She looked incredibly small, physically sick, utterly defeated, and completely broken. The professional movers will be here at exactly 8:00 a.m. tomorrow morning to pack your personal clothing and your design books, I told her, my hand resting firmly on the heavy brass doorknob. I suggest you find a hotel downtown that accepts cash or a personal check, because your corporate accounts will be completely audited and frozen by Julian's legal team by noon tomorrow. Have a wonderful, quiet evening in my house, Eleanor. It's the last one you'll ever have. I stepped out of the house into the crisp, cool, rain-scented evening air, closing the heavy oak front door firmly and permanently behind me. As I walked down the long concrete driveway toward my car, the deep, suffocating anger and betrayal that had lived in my chest for the last 3 weeks completely dissolved, replaced by a profound, clean, and beautiful sense of total liberation. I had lost my marriage, my pride had taken a massive hit, and the future I had spent 7 years designing was completely gone. But as I started my engine, turned on the headlights, and drove away from the silent suburbs into the bright, open, infinite lights of the city, I realized that the greatest thing that ever came after love wasn't a perfect relationship. It was the flawless, unyielding, and beautiful execution of absolute justice. The lie had been permanently neutralized, the variables had been corrected, and for the first time in a very long time, the data of my life was perfectly, beautifully clean.
Thank you for listening to the story all the way through. I'd appreciate your support in the form of likes and comments. It will help my channel grow.